Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wild 194. I hope you're doing well today. I have a review here for another Bentley Little book, who I've read quite a few things from. I started out reading The Haunted back in the day when I was just out of high school or in high school, something like that. And it was kind of typical haunted house stuff. And then I read The House, which I think was the first review I did for this channel, and I absolutely hated that book. It was awful. And then I read The Resort, I think last year, the year before, during summertime, and I loved it. I think The Resort is easily his favorite book. And this book I thought was going to top that as my personal favorite of his so far. And it has not by the end of it. This book here is called Bentley Little, The Collection. And this is a short story collection, compilation, whatever you'd like to call it. It's about 450 pages, and I'm not feeling the mint green, Bentley. I'm sorry, I'm just not. These hardcovers are, I'm just realizing in general, hardcovers are not for me anymore. I'm getting too old, it's hard to hold them up, it hurts. So, especially right now where I have some sunburn right here. I have like blisters today, dude. I was barely in the sun this weekend when my wife and I went to get in the pool. And not a fun day. This is going to be a hard review because I, like most collections from anybody, whether it be Stephen King, Jonathan Mayberry, Brian Keene, Bentley Little in this case, I typically, with collections, I love short stories. Matter of fact, a lot of the time I prefer them to modern day novels because of how bloated they are. But short stories I typically enjoy. The problem is most collections, like with this one, half of the book is really, really good or really enjoyable. The other half kind of sucks nuts, to be honest with you. And this is no different. So once again, you're getting a review collection here from yours truly that feels a little wish-washy about it. But I am going to kind of highlight the stories that I really want to talk about. And of course, for anybody who hasn't read the book, this is a spoiler-free channel. I don't really go into spoilers unless somebody brings something up in the comments and then I talk to them there. But I will give you some small ideas of what stories I really liked, what may or may not have worked for me, and just no spoilers, so I'm just letting you know ahead of time. The book here actually opens up with a really good story that I really liked a lot. It's kind of shocking, it's graphic. As an extreme horror novelist like Bentley Little, it's going to be like that sometimes in this book, not always. A lot of these stories, very much like in the very Bentley Little cartoon way, they can be over the top, they can be silly sometimes and cartoonish in how horrific they are. Think of something that was clever in some ways, like Billy and Mandy, the cartoon from back in the day. But that over-the-top cartoon nature is kind of what makes Bentley Little books fun. The Resort captures that perfectly. That book I talked about a moment ago being my favorite. Now, the first story in here is one that I really enjoyed. It was a great one to kick off the collection with, and you need that for a collection, and to have that first real good hook to get you in. And it's called The Sanctuary. Basically, there's a young man we're following, a young boy, matter of fact, and he and his sister are growing up in a house with their mom and their dog that's kind of creepy and very crazy religious. Think of like Carrie's mom, but worse, you know. So their dad's not in the picture. We get some answers on why that is. But if you don't understand how graphic Bentley Little stuff can get, or extreme horror, splatterpunk stuff can get, this story will spell that out for you in like 10 pages, I think. Yeah, about 12 pages, matter of fact, by the table of contents. And it's horrific. Basically, the young man's mom is so religious, but in a crazy way, not like in a Christian way. And she is crazy. Like, I don't know how to explain it without telling you too much, but there could be some sacrifice involved here, and it's... you won't forget it. If you read this book, you won't forget that short story. It's pretty horrific. One of like easily the top 5 in this. Probably in the top 3 for me. The next story in here, The Woods Be Dark, is kind of interesting. I don't know if I would call this like a Wendigo story or not. Basically, there's a family who have a house out in like kind of the deep woods. And at nighttime, every once in a while, people or a person will come out of the woods to them asking for help. It might be a family member who's been missing. If they don't come back before like sundown, then they know this is probably this creature and they can't let it inside of the house. It's kind of like a cool mystery creature feature thing. I did like it. I thought it had a weird twist by the end of it. But again, it's kind of like a Wendigo type story in a way, but I don't know if it's actually said in the book that it's that. But I like that. I thought it was a pretty cool idea. It reminds me of like Quiet Place, but without the lack of sound. You know, just that kind of not really hiding from the monster. The monster knows where you are, where you live, whatever. It's more about hoping that you'll trust it based on what it looks like. So it's kind of neat. I like the idea. The third story in here is really the beginning of the every other story being bad mentality that most collections have. It's called The Phone Book Man, about a phone book salesman. No, I'm good. The fourth or fifth story in here is one that I thought was magnificent. It's easily my favorite in the whole book. It actually had an adaptation on the TV show called Masters of Horror, where they had people like Mick Garris, John Carpenter, come in and make a single episode per 3 or 4 seasons, I think, of the TV show, where they made their own, maybe their own story, their own adaptation of another story. In this case, this one was adapted into a TV episode. I guess they were an hour long, I don't know. But this story here I absolutely loved. It's probably one of the best things that Bentley Little ever wrote. It's called The Washingtonians. And what it is, basically, is about a young man who I assume had a dead relative recently, and he was going through their stuff. And he found this letter written by George Washington, which may change the whole course of history, what we knew as Americans of the Founding Fathers and about the founding of America, for that matter. The idea that they may or may not, based on this letter that he's trying to get confirmed by a guy at a shop, whether it's real or not, that the Founding Fathers may have been cannibals. If that sounds like it appeals to you at all, you need to read this. It's a phenomenal story. I loved it, obviously fiction. But I loved it. I thought it was so wild and fun and zany. The best part about it is this captures also that over-the-top craziness that the Bentley Little cartoonish nature of his stories can get, and it is fucking fantastic. Washingtonians has an adaptation to that Masters of Horror show. I meant to watch it before I did this review. I've been too busy this weekend, my wife and I being out in the sun so much and just wanting to relax. That's why I finished the last 100 pages of this book finally after reading it over the course of a month. But The Washingtonians is amazing. I recommend it very, very highly. And after that story, a lot of these other stories are kind of forgettable, to be honest with you. Then you get to this one that I really like called The Idol. The Idol essentially revolves around James Dean, the famous young actor who died many, many, many years ago. It's about his movie Rebel Without a Cause. I think there's a couple of guys, I think they're brothers, if I remember correctly. They happen to be watching this film all the time. They love Rebel Without a Cause. And there's a scene where I think it was a tire iron that's thrown out in the woods or out in a bush or something in a particular location. And this particular young man remembers that apparently it was never recovered, and he kind of wondered if it was still out there or not. So he and his friend, his brother, whoever it is, go out to this place looking to see if they can find this tire iron. And what they discover is, again, cartoonish and horrific. And I loved it. Really great. I'm a fan of James Dean. I'm a fan of Rebel Without a Cause, like most people are. I don't think it's the best movie ever, but it's probably the best movie he ever made, as far as I know. And that was a cool little tribute to James Dean. That was pretty nice. Now, there's a story immediately after that called Skin. And Skin was, it was interesting. The ending of it kind of sucks. Basically, there's a family who are traveling on vacation. They see a tourist trap that is called something land, house, whatever. And they go to it, and when they get there, it's a house made of skin. Yes, human skin, not animal skin. And that is discovered fairly quickly, but then the end of the story happens, and it kind of makes it pretty bad, to be honest with you. So, just letting you know ahead of time. This next story after Skin is one that I did not like at all. I thought this was probably the worst in the book. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Some of the stories in here can be tributes to like Eraserhead. I think one is mentioning Eraserhead to the T in the author's note. By the way, every story has an author's note intro to it to let you know the history of this story, whether it was ever published or not, because there are stories in here that were never published at all that I thought was kind of cool. A lot of them could be for like anthology series that were never put out for whatever reason. And Bentley Little will tell you a little bit about that, maybe how he got the idea for each story. That's kind of nice. I like that as a fan of certain authors. If it's one of my favorite authors, I really like that. So that's for me, mainly. But this next story I was talking about that was so bad is called The Man in the Passenger Seat. Basically, a guy gets kidnapped, but he's driving, and the guy in the passenger seat is like a crazy homeless guy or something like that. And he tells them to do all this wacko stuff, and at one point they're kidnapping another girl, and the main character guy's kind of weird. He's like so perplexed by this weirdo situation that eventually he starts to become like, yeah man, that's pretty rad, you know, like it's so weird, dude. I don't like this story. It sucks balls, to be honest with you. Comes the Bad Time, I think is the one, if I remember correctly, because I looked over these stories as I got ready to review this. I tried to do it last night. I got super sick from the heat exhaustion, so I decided not to do it. But I think this is the story, when I tried to record today, about a guy who cuts open a tomato and sees the face of someone he loved. I think her name was like Elena or something, if I remember correctly. That story was pretty good. I liked it. Apparently it's most people's favorite from the book from what I saw on like Goodreads, but I thought it was pretty decent for what it was. Pretty cool. Let's see. A lot of the stories from this point on are not that great, but like maybe about 100 pages later, you get this one that I really liked. And again, this is a story out of the very maybe one or two in here that were never published that was called Full Moon on Death Row. And this is a really cool one. I really like this a lot. Maybe it's a little meandering for a lot of people. Maybe a lot of you, if you happen to read the book, probably won't care about it as much as I did, but I thought it was pretty eventful as a revenge tale. Basically, the idea about the story is that once upon a time, there was going to be a short story collection, and this is the real story, like the author's note thing. There was going to be a compilation anthology called The Full Moon on Death Row, and every single story in the book would have that exact same title, and everybody had to write a story based on that title being the same thing. Like they would write their own story about that title. And the obvious one would be, make it a werewolf story. That's not what this is. Basically, there are two guys who are Indians, and I can say that because I'm Red Cherokee, so suck my nuts. Red Cherokee guys, or not Red Cherokee guys, they're part of a tribe and everything on a modern-day reservation, and when they're out somewhere, they happen to find, or at least one of them sees, the three men who murdered both of their dads, if I remember correctly. And they take it back to their tribe leaders to ask them, like, hey, can we go kill these guys? Can we get some revenge on this? What do you think? And some weird things begin to come out about the history of the tribe, about these three men, about their dads. And these two are like brothers that want to go up after these guys. It's a really cool, kind of supernatural revenge story. If you like that kind of thing, if you like kind of conspiratorial stuff, not in like a conspiracy theory JFK shooting way, but like in a small town story, if you will. This is pretty cool. I really liked it a lot. Really good story, man. Bentley Little told one hell of a tale here. Yeah, but Full Moon, I think, is the main character's name, if I remember. Let's see. The Show is the next story immediately after that. This one is a little weak. I would be curious whether people would like it as much as I did. It's kind of bland, but I liked it. Basically, there's a guy that we follow that comes from a broken house where his parents fight all the time, and his friend wants to help him escape a little bit, and he asks him to take him to this show that he wants to go to really late at night. The main character keeps saying, well, what is it? Best friend says, I don't want to tell you until we get there. They get there and they realize, or at least the main character realizes, because his friend knew the whole time, they're watching a live filming, on a live stream, I guess, of a snuff film being made, where somebody's being murdered. And it is not as gruesome as you would think it would be, which is wild. It's the end of the story that's pretty jacked up, in my opinion. So you may or may not like the tale, but the ending is pretty interesting, in my opinion. So that maybe it just appealed to me more, maybe because I thought it was a neat little twist on the idea, but that's it. Not as predictable as you would think, but maybe slightly, you know? Let's see. The next story in here is one that I completely hated. Thought it was terrible. It was called The Mailman. And basically this guy grows up terrified of midgets. Think of like Vern Troyer, is that his name, from Austin Powers? He's just terrified of midgets because of a bad experience he had when he was a kid. And apparently this is based on the same situation that Bentley Little had when he was a kid, which I thought was kind of funny. But his new mailman in his neighborhood where he just moved to is a midget. And it is so funny. It's weird. It's cartoonish, but it's not as good as what most Bentley Little stuff can be when it's so silly like this. Yeah, it's a weird one, man. Let's see. Pillow Talk. Pillow Talk is one I have to talk about. This is one that my boy Monster Blood. Go check out his YouTube channel. I'd love to see you check him out and watch some of his awesome reviews. But this is one that every time I would go to pick up the book and I would get to this story, I had not heard about the story going into the book, because of course this is the first time I ever read it. I don't look up anything before I go into books because I don't want to be spoiled for anything at all. This is the one that I was thinking, Monster Blood would probably cringe and think, what the fuck am I reading, if it was him reading this book. Basically, this man wakes up one day and his pillow is talking to him, but it's saying very weirdly sexual things. It's not like perverse, well, I guess it is, but not like in a take me behind the dumpster type of thing. It's more of like, please come to me, please hug me, and his pillow tries to hug him. And eventually it devolves into some worse things, and I'm going to tell you, I laughed my ass off. This was such a horrifically funny, stupid story. But it was stupid in a so bad it's good way, but it wasn't like deliberately bad. It was well crafted, it was well written. Bentley Little has this satirical note to his work that was amazing here. I really loved it, compared to a story about a potato later on that was awful. It really sucked. But this was fun. I actually really enjoyed this story, as horrifically stupid as it sounds. Now, the story after that I really liked too, even though towards the latter half of the book, and this is in the latter half, a lot of the stories really were just filler to fill the book out and make it hit that 450 page number. This one's called Maya's Mother. Maya's Mother was a pretty shockingly horrific story about a detective, like a private eye, who has to go on an investigation after a kind of lead gangster, who's not officially a gangster, but he has like his henchmen and stuff, tells him that he had sex with his maid, who was, I think, Hispanic, Spanish, something like that. He had sex with her daughter, who was like 16, 17, and when he finished, I guess you could say without being too disgusting, she turned into a rag doll. And now he begins to believe that he's being cursed by the maid, who is now gone. They don't know what happened to her. He doesn't know why the daughter turned into a rag doll and what happened with that. If she was ever real, if she wasn't real, he doesn't know. But he believes this maid is putting a curse on him, and horrific things begin to happen to him, and it's awesome. It's a great read. I really love it. Probably, again, in the top 5 of the book, in my opinion. Really, really good story. Not even like a revenge tale, just a private eye not being able to explain what he's seeing here. And this curse stuff is shocking, to say the least. So, let's see. Then you have some in here like this one called Confessions of a Corporate Man. And if I remember correctly, that's the one where it's like The Office, but like, do you remember the old YouTube channels that would show like Nerf War, and they would have like, I guess it was a set, I don't think it was like a real Office team fighting, but they would shoot Nerf guns at each other in a war. This is like that, but like actually killing each other, like having wars within the office. You might have like the HR department versus, whatever, the packaging department, I guess. And that was pretty fun. It was stupid. It was cartoonish in a good way, but it was fun. I like that story. Kind of grisly sometimes, but, I don't know. But apparently Bentley Little had an office job at one point before he tried to make money off of his fiction, and I guess nonfiction too, and he hated that. And apparently a lot of that animosity, according to his author's note, is in this particular story, so I thought that was kind of cool too. Let's see. Blood. Blood is the next story, and that's a very weird one. About a man one day who is making macaroni and cheese in his kitchen, and the foam begins to make a weird face that's smiling at him, and it begins to mouth this word that he can't figure out. And then eventually he realizes when it begins to make whispering noises around his apartment, it's saying the word blood, like the title. And that becomes very strange, completely nonsensical. By the end of it, it kind of makes a little bit more sense, but it's very weird. I don't know why the character would do the things he does in here, but I'm not going to complain. It was kind of wild. How many times do you see of like an evil macaroni and cheese story? It ain't happening, man. Or evil pasta. It's like creepy pasta, but just evil. I don't know. Pretty cool. So, there's some other stories in here, like The Baby, that I just was not into. The Baby was way more sympathetic about a group of kids who find a dead baby in like an old abandoned warehouse. It's not really like scary, I guess. It's gross, it's creepy, but it's not scary, I don't know if it's to make you uneasy. I don't really know what the goal of that story was, but I didn't like that one. It really didn't fit into what I know for Bentley Little. It wasn't cartoonish, it wasn't satirical, and by the end of it, the final thing they choose to do was just... I don't know. Okay, so the final story in here that I do want to talk about, it's not the potato story that I mentioned earlier, which is just not that good. Pretty bad. It's called The Murmurous Haunt of Flies. Apparently it's named after a poem, and that story is the final closer for the book. Essentially, there's a grandfather that this main guy, and I think his fiance, wife, whatever, show up to visit the grandfather. And while they're there, the grandfather reminds him, like, hey, you remember out in the field, there's a bunch of, and they're on a farm, by the way, there's out in the field, there's all these, like, shacks and sheds and stuff. Do not go out there. Evil things happen when people go out there. That's where I found your grandmother, so on and so on. And that mystery begins to draw at this man and his wife and interest them even more. Now that they're kind of on vacation, they don't have a whole lot to do. And they can't really keep away from the thought of going to that place. And they may or may not wander over there. And something pretty sad kind of happens, but not really scary per se. So you may or may not like it. As I said, most of the stories in here are kind of disappointing, whether just in bad execution or just not really fitting into the compilation I would know of Bentley Little stuff. Too many short story collections are, like I said earlier, just filled with a lot of stuff authors couldn't either get published or an anthology that fell apart, whatever. That wasn't as much of the issue here. It's just a good half of the stories can start out really strong and end poorly, or vice versa. Start out kind of weak and end with a pretty solid, maybe surprising ending. And that's kind of a weird mishmash of things to happen here that may or may not pique your interest. So, depending on whether you like Bentley Little or not, I don't know if I'd recommend the book. I would certainly recommend the story of the Washingtonians. If you can get a copy of this cheap and read that, because I got my copy for like $6. I'm a Bentley Little collector anyway, so I'm glad I was able to get a copy of this in general. But if you can read a copy of the Washingtonians, you'll love it. I really do think everybody would love that one because of how entertaining it was. American or not, I think you would dig it. But there's a lot of really good stuff in here. Just there's that good half of the book that is disappointing and is a mess, to be honest with you. But overall, at the end of the day, I do recommend the collection depending on who you are. If you're a big Bentley Little fan, you're going to get some stuff you're going to love. You're going to get some stuff you're not going to love that much and probably will completely forget like I did until I had to kind of remind myself as of last night and today of what was in here. But it has some really good stuff in here, some stuff I'd love to see get adapted, and some of it that was, like I said. If I had to rate the collection on a 5-star basis, sadly, like many short story collections, I would give it like a 3 out of 5 stars. Maybe a little bit higher than that, but not a 4. I recommend it to the right person. I don't think it's going to be for everybody. As I've said many times with Little, he's not going to be for everybody. These can be vile, gruesome, horrific stories. Not as sexual as I'm used to seeing with his books either, which was kind of surprising. A lot of extreme horror people push and push and push for that, like Richard Mailman. But that's not really the case with Little or Brian Keene, you know? So that's kind of surprising here. But the collection, it's got its moments. I recommend it, I guess, based on that if you happen to be a fan of Little, or even not, if you want to try something out and this is the only thing you can find. It's not a horrible read. It's just kind of a mixed bag, like many times, of compilations of short stories. But I have like 1 or 2 other collections of his, so maybe I'll try to review those at some point, not anytime soon. I'm kind of like in the novel mindset right now. I don't really want to read comics right now. I don't really want to read short stories right now, even though I prefer that most of the time. I kind of just want to read novels right now. I'm still working on Salem's Lot by Stephen King before this remake comes out, so hopefully you'll see a review sometime soon for that, God willing, but we'll see. Anyway, that is my review for Bentley Little's The Collection. What did you think about it if you've read the book? Are you going to read the book after what I recommended here, or did not recommend, or whatever? I'd love to hear all that down below, too. Thank you all for watching, guys. What do you think is the best Bentley Little book? Let me know that, too. Thank you, guys. God bless you all. Catch you later, and goodbye.